Let's talk about the framework trade deal that was reached between the U.S. and the EU yesterday. Emmanuel Macron has said that the deal is a dark day for Europe.
I don't know if the exact numbers will be the same that Canada will get, insofar as we are witnessing in Europe a deal that is not good for Europe.
A shift in priorities. Yesterday, the world witnessed the signing of a significant trade deal between the United States and the European Union, but not without its consequences. French President Emmanuel Macron described the agreement as a dark day for Europe, indicating the strained feelings surrounding it. Donald Trump's latest deal with the EU is nothing short of monumental, with a 15% tariff on many goods, a vast energy commitment, and billions of dollars funneled into the U.S. economy. The setting for this deal, a flashy handshake in Scotland, was designed for global headlines. Yet, amidst the fanfare, one notable absence was Canada. Canada, the United States' largest trading partner, found itself overlooked, and this wasn't an accident. For Trump, trade deals are about optics and leverage, not just economics. While the EU provided a stage for his political ambitions, complete with an eye-catching deal and a flow of investments, Canada couldn't offer the same short-term political payoff. The EU's deal generated immediate headlines, and those are the types of victories Trump craves. Meanwhile, Canada, already firmly embedded in U.S. supply chains, offers fewer dramatic, eye-popping changes to its trade relationship with the U.S. The problem for Canada is that its trade ties are so deeply ingrained in the American system that it can't offer the same kind of concessions as Japan or the EU, countries still looking to expand their influence with the U.S. It's a challenge that leaves Canada with few options. While it's easy to make deals with nations that want access to U.S. markets, the deeper, more complex relationship with Canada doesn't lend itself to the flashy simplicity that Trump is after. For Canadian leaders, particularly Prime Minister Mark Carney, this presents a difficult dilemma. Carney knows that a quick fix won't solve the underlying issues. Any trade agreement must benefit Canada in the long term, not just stave off tariffs in the short run. Unlike the EU, Canada doesn't need to buy U.S. energy. It's already an energy exporter, which complicates any negotiation aimed at replicating the EU's framework. In this context, Carney has adopted a measured, strategic approach, refusing to rush into a deal that would sacrifice Canada's long-term interests. Carney's statements reflect this strategy. Canada will only sign a deal if it's in the country's best interest. As a result, Canada is preparing for potential tariffs and is quietly holding out for better opportunities, such as the scheduled USMCA review in 2026. Carney's refusal to rush into a trade deal might seem risky, but it's also a calculated bet on Canada's future. In an environment where the U.S. is pushing hard for quick agreements, Canada's decision to take its time is a subtle yet strategic move. Even in the face of short-term pain, especially in the automotive, steel, aluminum, and lumber sectors, Canada's broader economy has shown resilience. With GDP only dipping by 0.1% in April and projected to drop by another 0.1% in May, Canada has weathered the storm better than expected. Thanks to the CUSMA agreement, over 90% of cross-border trade continues to flow with minimal tariffs, maintaining an average effective rate of just 2.3%. Still, the situation remains fragile. If Trump's threatened 35% blanket tariff on August 1st materializes, Canada will be tested further. But one thing is clear. Canada is not just reacting to U.S. pressure, it's actively planning its next move. And as much as the U.S. may try to pressure Canada into a quick trade deal, Carney's stance is unwavering. For Canada, the long game is far more important than a quick win. And in a trade war, waiting might be the boldest move of all. Trump's dismissal and Canada's strategic response. As the days leading up to the August 1st deadline draw nearer, President Donald Trump made a striking statement regarding Canada's position in the trade discussions. In a moment that caught many off guard, Trump openly acknowledged that the U.S. had not really been focused on Canada, and suggested that a trade deal might not even be reached. It wasn't a mere offhand remark. It was a public dismissal of Canada as a priority in the ongoing trade negotiations. For Ottawa, this wasn't just a slap in the face. It was an opportunity. Trump's words were not seen as a threat, but rather a signal of his impatience, one that inadvertently handed Canada the upper hand in this phase of the trade conflict. Unlike his approach to Japan or the UK, where pressure was carefully escalated, Trump's blunt declaration revealed a surprising lack of strategic finesse. His impatience, rather than forcing Canada into a deal, has provided Canada with an unexpected advantage. By showing his cards too early, Trump gave Canada the space to recalibrate its approach and prepare for a more favorable position. Prime Minister Mark Carney and his team have spent weeks carefully managing public expectations, signaling that Canada will not rush into any deal simply to avoid tariffs. The narrative they have crafted is one of patience and prudence. When Trump openly admitted that negotiations with Canada might fail, he effectively confirmed what Canadian negotiators had been saying all along. Canada would not be rushed into a deal that didn't meet its long-term interests. This public concession was a rare moment of communication victory for Ottawa. It gave Canada the cover it needed. Now, if talks collapse, Ottawa can point to the U.S. as the one to walk away first, not Canada. It was a rare case of silence from Canada being met with a loud concession from the other side. This reversal of roles strengthened Canada's position, even without a formal trade agreement on the table. But Trump's comments also created a conundrum for his own team. On one hand, his administration's officials, such as Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer, had been in productive discussions with Canadian officials, painting a picture of constructive talks. Yet, at the very same time, the president's public rhetoric undermined those efforts. This internal contradiction created confusion within the U.S. camp and forced Canadian officials to question who truly held the authority in the negotiations. As a result, Canada has been able to slow down the pace of talks, patiently awaiting a more coherent and unified stance from the U.S. government. This disarray within the U.S. position is providing Canada with more leverage. The more fractured the American message becomes, the more Canada can strategically maneuver, waiting for an opportunity to negotiate from a position of greater strength. In the short term, Canada may appear to be on the defensive, but its calm, deliberate response to Trump's impatience is, in fact, a calculated strategy. By refusing to engage in the U.S. fast deal game, Canada is holding out for the right deal, one that protects its national interests without sacrificing long-term economic stability. Moreover, this situation has set the stage for the upcoming USMCA review in 2026. While Trump may be pushing for stricter origin rules and other trade controls, Canada could use the review process to argue that any current tariffs have already failed as a tool for leverage. If the U.S. imposes 35% tariffs without reaching a negotiated settlement, Canada will have a strong case to make in 2026 that tariffs are not the way forward. Trump's credibility in these talks could suffer, and Canada is positioning itself to capitalize on that shift. A strategic pivot and long-term calculations. The unexpected public remarks from President Trump regarding Canada's place in the trade talks have set off a cascade of reactions both in Canada and within the U.S. As tensions mount and tariffs threaten to reshape the North American trade landscape, the idea of Canada pivoting toward other international partners, most notably China, has surfaced. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, known for his frankness, openly suggested that if U.S. tariffs continue, Canada might look to deepen its trade relations with Beijing. This statement was not a passing remark. It was a deliberate signal of a potential strategic shift. In one of the most uncertain trade climates in North American history, Ford's words underscore the growing realization in Canada that its dependency on U.S. trade may no longer be sustainable if Washington continues down its unpredictable path. Ford's declaration reflects the growing unease in Canada, where the reliance on the U.S. for trade has traditionally been a cornerstone of its economic strategy. But with the threat of escalating tariffs hanging over the nation, Canadian leaders have begun considering new options. And China, with its vast manufacturing capabilities and global market reach, has emerged as a viable alternative. While Ford emphasized that any new relationship with China must be fair and mutually beneficial, the potential for a shift in Canada's trade alignment is real. In fact, Canada has already started to make moves in that direction, with the Canadian government quietly escalating its tariffs on American steel and aluminum to match U.S. increases. More importantly, Canada is expanding its trade relationships outside the U.S., with growing interest in China. Ontario alone conducts over $43 billion in two-way trade with China, and Canadian businesses have already begun sourcing materials, such as aluminum cans, from China rather than the U.S., due to soaring prices resulting from Trump's tariffs. In response to the unpredictability of U.S. trade policies, Canadian businesses have been adapting, recalibrating supply chains, and exploring new export lanes. This shift is not just a tactical maneuver. It represents a broader strategic reevaluation of Canada's long-term trade relationships. If this pivot toward China becomes permanent, the effects will reverberate throughout North America, with the U.S. feeling the loss of Canada as one of its most significant trade partners. In 2024, Canada purchased $349 billion worth of goods from the U.S., more than Japan, Germany, and the U.K. combined. A shift of even a small portion of that trade to China would have a profound impact on U.S. manufacturers, particularly in sectors such as autos, machinery, agriculture, and energy. This is not just about losing trade volume. It's about weakening the strategic alliance between the U.S. and its closest neighbor. If Canada begins to look eastward for trade opportunities, it will have long-term implications for American businesses, particularly those in states like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, where U.S.-Canada trade is a critical lifeline. But the consequences of Canada's potential pivot to China go beyond the economic sphere. Strategically, China has long sought to expand its influence in the Western Hemisphere. A deeper trade relationship with Canada would provide Beijing with increased leverage in North America, a region that Washington has worked tirelessly to dominate for decades. For the U.S., pushing Canada away may result in losing more than just a trade partner. It could lose its foothold in one of the most economically and politically important regions of the world. The irony here is striking. Trump's tariffs, initially designed to protect American workers, have instead created a volatile environment that has driven Canada to reconsider its relationship with the U.S. While the White House aimed to pull Canada closer, it has instead driven a wedge between the two nations. As Canada diversifies its trade partnerships and begins exploring options with China, Trump's tariffs, which were supposed to bring Canada to heel, may instead push it into Beijing's arms. For the U.S., the consequences of this trade war could be far-reaching. Trump promised to secure better trade deals, but tariffs have delivered only hesitation, retaliation, and uncertainty. In trying to protect American workers, the administration may have undermined the very relationships it sought to strengthen. If Canada turns toward China, the U.S. could find itself facing not only an economic setback, but a strategic one, as its most reliable neighbor becomes more closely aligned with a global competitor. In this new trade world, where tariffs and threats of isolation shape global dynamics, the true cost of American protectionism may not be felt immediately. But if the U.S. continues down this path, the cracks in its trade strategy will only become more apparent. The damage may not just be economic, it may be political and strategic, weakening America's standing in a rapidly changing global landscape. For now, Canada is playing the long game, carefully navigating the shifting tides of international trade. It may not be rushing to sign a deal with the U.S., but in this case, the boldest move might just be to wait and see how the situation unfolds. The clock is ticking toward 2026, and when that year arrives, Canada will be ready to make its move, stronger and more strategically positioned than before.